folks. Welcome to the community chat. We're here talking about climate destinations and housing issues. Let's go around and introduce ourselves. I think probably everyone on the channel knows me. Jay, would you like to introduce yourself, your location?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jay Coldwell in Wausau, Wisconsin, and I'm on the Sustainability Committee for the City of Wausau. Um, and probably, unlike most of you, I'm a little bit worried about how many people are going to move here, and how we deal with that.
Yeah, that's a legit issue, right? When we're
Mhm.
talking about destinations and housing, I think that helps us to see this resource scarcity crunch, right? I think
Mhm.
it's an important awareness and perspective to bring to the issue. Kyle, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, my name's Kyle. I'm over here in eastern Iowa along the Mississippi River.
Sarah, I'm glad that you were able to join us. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hey everyone, my name's Sarah. I live in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, which is already experiencing some housing challenges because it's become a destination area in our region due to how expensive the cities are. So definitely relevant with the upcoming predictions of people coming here as well.
Jesse, if you could take a second, let's hear from your household here.
Hi, we're Desi and Jonathan. We're near in a suburb of Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I think Michigan wants people to move to the state. And Kalamazoo is a city that is, I mean, it's gentrifying, so that's not so awesome. Um, but it's definitely got room to grow and it is growing as we speak. So I think that, yeah, I think they're ready.
It's also worth noting that we used to live in Texas, just north of Austin. We moved up here about a year and a half, a little bit more ago, specifically because of climate issues in Texas, and we picked Michigan, uh, this region, because we like the climate outlook, various other factors.
Partly we ended up here, just we knew someone nearby, and it's so beautiful here. Um, I think they do have some out of date infrastructure that needs to be addressed, but as far as room for people, and I think there are housing issues too, but I think that's pretty much everywhere in the United States.
I would agree that there are some parts of Michigan that are in the sort of actively looking to grow category. There are some parts of Iowa that are also actively looking to grow. And Jay, as you were talking about, there are some places in Wisconsin, there are some places in Minnesota where people are already starting to feel like a crunch around the capacity issues. Tara, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Tara. I live in the Phoenix area and I am looking to move out of the Phoenix area. So I'm interested in what has to be said here today.
So we've got people who are running a full gamut here in terms of people who have made the move based in part on climate, people who are looking to make the move, and people who are trying to build resilience in different ways in areas that could be counted as climate destinations. I think it's good for us to be able to come together and talk a little bit about some of these pressures around housing. And Jay, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what it's like building a resilience in Wausau. That is a community that I have named on the climate destination videos as having a lot of potential for growth. You have a lot of good cards that you're holding, and I can understand why you would be considered concerned about capacity issues as well in this conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the other things I'm a little bit active in is local food and trying to encourage local farmers who grow a variety of crops, and hopefully the surrounding county doesn't become a monocrop area as some of the other places become more difficult to grow the kind of the big monocrop farms. Um, but yeah, the housing is we already underhoused, and housing is relatively expensive compared with people's incomes here. Um, Much less than in some areas, but incomes are not real high. And infrastructure is a huge issue, and very expensive for. And Wausau is a pretty small city, actually, about 40,000 people, but the other kind of contiguous towns and villages add up to maybe 100,000, 80 to 100. But we just built a new water treatment plant, and so people's water bills are going up, their property taxes are going up. They're worried about kind of getting priced out of living, like happens in a lot of places where population goes up quickly and the infrastructure is just not quite there to handle it. I would say that not many people are worried about that yet, just because we haven't seen a huge growth yet. But I would say we're not really on top of our issues to start with. So as things start to grow, it's going to be more and more of a challenge, I think.
And I've talked with other people in your like professional kind of sphere in Decorah, Iowa, if you've ever heard of that community. They were starting to think about looking 20, 30 years out, the probability of growth across the region and their water outlook. When you think about water with the water treatment plant, do you know how the groundwater is in your area? Is it monitored?
There is, I believe, plenty of groundwater. It needs a lot of filtration. We found a lot of PFAS in the groundwater, and they added some temporary filtration to the treatment plant, and they're going to build a more robust one this year. They've started on that already. There's some mining companies who are interested in doing mining within the watershed, which is a big concern. Trying to keep them out. They need to do mining where it's not going to be right, under the water table, or in the middle of the water table. But yeah, at least right now, the water levels are fine and should be fine for growth, as long as it's used conservatively. Of course, nobody knows what's going to happen with rain patterns and that sort of thing. But for now, we're good. We're right on the Wisconsin River, and that we don't directly use the water from the river. We use it from wells, but certainly that has something to do with water tables as well.
The location in terms of multiple water sources, I remember being very good. And it's interesting to hear that your community is having some infrastructure upgrades. So I live in rural Iowa. I live in Poweshiek County, which is the same county that Grinnell College is in. A lot of people have heard of that as like a basic anchoring point. And we have a more shallow aquifer here than some places, and there is an increasing awareness of water as an issue in sort of this destination footprint in the Midwest, where I think that we have successfully pushed off, at least for a while, soy crushing plants being built in the county, which are very water intensive. And there's not a lot of benefit in doing that processing here. What you say about mining, with the need to protect these livable areas. And you are also talking about, I think, the need to protect agricultural diversity as part of our housing plan. I think that probably resonates with a lot of us here. The fact that when we're thinking about resilient housing systems, we also have to think about resilient food systems in tandem. Just a final note on the infrastructure, though. I hear about a lack of investment in infrastructure in many areas, and I don't think it's coincidental that we do hear about infrastructure investment in these destination communities. I live in a town of 90 people, and we are getting underground power lines this winter. That is a major infrastructure investment that is going on in rural America right now in these destination regions. Kyle, I saw you smiling at that one.
I'm so jealous because we just got whole new power poles. It's all above ground. It's still a hot mess, But yeah, it's same thing for me in the Far East. There's been a big push. They're doing permeable roads all around. They're doing new power lines, they're trying.
I think that it's important that these investments are made Obviously we want to move more people into the area, but because I think it's also an acknowledgement of like my area is vulnerable to straight line windstorms. We got torn up by the derecho in 2020. And so these sorts of investments, when we talk about these destination regions, it's not that they're cakey, right? It's that we have a potential to build resilience against their already difficult environmental conditions. Do you hear anything about that in Michigan? Michigan has like infrastructure challenges that I think maybe you were alluding to.
I'm not 100% up to speed on, but yeah, definitely the gentrification is a big challenge, especially in big cities like Detroit, but even in the small town city of Kalamazoo, we see it happening. And we know about Flint and their water problem, which is still not resolved. Benton Harbor also had some problems with water, drinking water. So yeah, there are issues, but I believe from the last time I looked into it, the governing bodies of the state are looking at ways to invest in the infrastructure with preparedness for they know that they're a climate destination state. They're aware of that and they're working on it, but I don't know how much or how fast.
So it's like a lifting planning stage, but not a doing stage yet. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
There was one video that we were watching.
Oh, we can't hear you. Get over by the mic.
Sorry. There was one video that we were watching from a guy who was doing an analysis of water-based infrastructure in Michigan. And if I remember correctly, a big concern of his was with increased rainfall. It was that kind of water system where if it floods, it backwashes your water into the sewer system or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called. There was concern about that, and we researched.
I don't think that was specifically in Michigan. That was based on.
Wait, now we lost you.
Oh, we lost you. I don't think that was specifically in Michigan, but any time that a city has a sort of water treatment input system that can contaminate the groundwater, that's a problem. And so that was what it was. It wasn't specific to Michigan.
Right.
It was specific to water treatment.
So just in terms of some general, like on the ground fact finding, Sarah, you are in a destination-y area for climate in the Northeast, where we expect to see high rates of movement within the region. What's your take on what's going on infrastructure in that part of the region there in Pennsylvania?
So I'm new to this part of Pennsylvania, and I actually grew up in Philly. And for me, going from a major metro to a smaller metro, I guess I see a difference that maybe the locals wouldn't, as far as what's available regarding infrastructure. There's where I live is low taxes, but we have to pay for a lot of things. Water is expensive here. We have to pay for our own trash removal. I think in Pennsylvania specifically, it's very varied by which town you're in.
So extremely local control and extremely local funding you're talking about for these infrastructure projects.
Yes.
So it's a definite like know before you go in terms of looking for an actual house. You've really got to do a sensitive sort of county by county basis, it sounds like.
Yes, I would also say as a general rule of thumb, we have a couple big cities here and then a bunch of medium-sized cities. And I would say that the closer you are to the cities, the more infrastructure you're going to have.
I feel so fortunate to be in this unusual pocket in rural Iowa, where I said we're getting the underground power lines. We have a number of local utility companies, like local electric companies. The local rural electrical cooperative is transitioning to entirely local wind power. There are a number of communities that have reached complete energy sustainability, including one nearby, the Amana colonies, is now running on biofuel. They're collecting their cow poop, and they have a total cow poop power situation going on over there. And there's also really good internet. I have fiber internet in rural Iowa that was delivered by the cooperative. You know, the cooperative dug the line to my house. So if you're looking for destinations and you're interested in places with a lot of infrastructure investment, I think that Iowa does not make a lot of people's lists on the resilience scene, but people in this state are really getting tough. They're really getting ready so that the next derecho does not kick us as much as the last one did. And as we're talking about that, I feel like housing availability is another serious issue, right? Sarah, what do you have to say? You look like you have spicy feelings on this front.
I don't know about spicy feelings, but well, I just recently bought my house, so I'm chilling, but a lot of people around here have some spicy feelings about it. I think what's happening right now throughout the Northeast is that the big cities have kind of stabilized from the craziness that was happening over the last few years. If anything, home prices are like starting to go down, but inventory is very tight. And what also is happening is that because of how tight things are in the big cities, satellite cities are starting to see dramatic price increases, like small to medium-sized cities. So where I am now would be, I guess, considered a satellite city, and people who are from this area and know how it's always been and how it's changing now, they tell me that the housing market is really tight. There is a lot of new construction going on around my area and some of the other mid-sized cities in like central to eastern PA, but it's not enough for the demand.
In my area, the housing prices have increased so much, so dramatically, so far beyond wages. The house that I purchased in 2020 has more than doubled in value. And there are a lot of people who have seen that happen. To be fair, my house was extremely busted. We bought it because it was like the most broken a house could be, and you could still have children in it while you were still fixing it up. So like the fact that it's been de-ruined may have changed its value somewhat. But the dramatic change in housing in some of our more rural areas, some of our more agricultural communities, is a serious concern. When I was talking with people up in Duluth and talking with people in Bend, Oregon, before this conversation about housing destinations, they've had these challenge where a lot of people who are looking to retire have bought like a second house there and have driven up prices enormously and aren't contributing to the labor of the community because they're retired, right? So then anyone who is going to be working at the wages in the community has nowhere to live. So this is a problem, right? This is not so much a problem that I've noticed in my area. I wonder if anyone else can comment on that sort of dynamic where they are.
So, not where I am, but I used to live in Maine. I lived there for 3 years, and that has been going on there for years, and now is becoming dramatically worse because of the increase in home prices. Local, like working class Mainers are really struggling as far as housing.
It's going to create a lot of social tension. Jay, what's the vibe like on this dynamic in your area up in that beautiful part of Wisconsin?
Yeah, there's not much available, not much housing inventory available, and prices are up somewhat. I'm not real close to that, maybe a little bit closer to the rental market where the city's been trying to add more rental units, but developers seem so sketchy. It's just like, you start 3 projects and 2 of them get derailed for one reason or another, and then the taxpayers worry about how much the city's subsidizing them and that sort of thing. But you hear stories about rents going up by like 50%. And so it's really tough on that working class sector of the city where they can't afford a house, especially with the interest rates what they are, and there aren't very many houses on the market anyway. And then apartments have gotten to be so expensive too. It's for a small town like this, they're almost like urban rental rates. So it's there's a lot of pressure on the city to provide more housing, but like I said, it's been really slow going. I don't know if that's if it's a problem of city management, or if it seems like the developers in Wisconsin, we hear about these same developers being involved in other mid-sized cities across the state, and it seems like a lot of them get partway and they collapse and they just don't happen, and it can take just far too long to increase the supply of housing.
It's really interesting to me is hearing about this challenge at the developer level. And I think that a lot of people who are interested in resilience are not like super happy with the current type of housing that is usually being built, right? Like the giant box for one person to live in as opposed to high density or walkable housing. This would be something interesting to look into more, is what sorts of innovation is taking place in that space to make the sort of higher density housing people say all the time that they want to live in. And it has to be, it's interesting to introduce that, Jay, as like a city level problem, that cities are trying to get in contact with developers to build more housing and the projects are falling apart. Do you think it's related to supply chain issues or just general sketch?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to get very much information about it because the local press is not great. You could probably say that about almost anywhere these days. But the city's been trying to do high density housing. They've tried to redevelop the waterfront. There was a downtown mall that failed, and they tore that down, and they're trying to convert that into apartment high density housing. There was a couple of pretty good sized projects that did succeed, but it just seems like there's kind of a common story of developer wins a bid, they mess around with it for a year, they come back and ask for more money, and then they've got another project in another city that kind of takes precedence, and things just kind of sit. They just don't move along like you would think they should. And I don't know what the reason for that is. If it's developer capacity and competency kind of thing, or if the city's picking the wrong developers, or I'm not sure what's going on with that.
It's a cool insight into the layers of the problem, though. And I like what you talk about with the weakening of the local press. I think in communities all across the United States, we've experienced dramatic weakening of the local press and more challenges getting this locally relevant information. The housing stock by you over by the Mississippi River. I heard just Friday, I heard that downriver in St. Louis, Missouri, the flood insurance rates just got like super hiked. So that's kind of at the edge, the southern edge of what we might think of as a Midwestern area with climate resilience, really a lot of potential, where the probability of the 500-year flood being like every year has made the big insurers start getting out of the market in the Midwest, like they have in Florida, like they have in California, like they have in Louisiana. But sorry for the long-winded transition, Kyle. I hope you'll forgive me. Is that a pressure where you are? How are you all doing with the river?
So honestly, no. Clinton used to flood very regularly up until the 1970s. They had a massive flood that covered the city, and the city invested heavily. They built a dike all the way across because the city's right on the river. They built this massive dike, which is now our waterfront. It's good for like the 1,000-year, 10,000-year flood level. And since they've done that, it's quite nice. The city stays dry, and I really don't have to worry about flooding or anything. Since prices have went crazy, like Clinton itself has been a depressed economy since the 1970s. We've lost even 2010 to 2020, my city lost the most population as a percentage of all of Iowa. We have the highest homeless percentage in all of Iowa by population. Wow. But I'm not real convinced that it's prices necessarily, because even though our rent in our rental market has gone up considerably, low wages around here have gone up considerably as well. And we still have a huge amount of old, decrepit housing stock that the city's trying to knock down to try and increase prices. But prior to like me purchasing our house, right, I did a bunch of research, and houses appreciated on average like 1% every year or two prior to my purchasing. And COVID certainly accelerated that, right? But Clinton's still full of very cheap housing. Our energy's a little bit more expensive. Our utilities are a little bit more expensive, but our housing is incredibly cheap. It's all built with old growth wood. And we do have a rash of development going on. And these are all for like luxury housing or senior housing for luxury prices. I don't know how those developments, quite honestly, will work out in this area, but all in all, there's plenty of houses. There's just not a lot of economic opportunity here, which keeps a lot of people away.
It's a challenge, all in sort of this like upper Riverlands area. Davenport, the rest, all the Quad Cities up in Dubuque, the anti-flood measures that have been put in place are just enormous. They're like role models for the nation, the anti-flood measures in the cities of Northern Iowa there.
And just
but the economic issue is big.
Just to correct you on that, all the flood mitigation measures went down, and the city of Davenport decided not to enact them. They never built a dike, which is why Davenport gets flooded so much worse every single year, because all of the...
They want to get flooded. They've got the green approach. They set up the whole big park system to get flooded.
I mean, their downtown does still get massively flooded, though.
Has it been getting into the commercial areas?
Yeah.
Because, you know, they built that huge green, right? And I'm sorry to the general audience. It's like serious Iowa discussion here. So this is the Quad Cities you're talking about, where the commercial district is flooding.
Yeah, it's specifically the city of Davenport. Their downtown floods catastrophically every year or two. And it's their older downtown, and it just is what it is. A lot of small businesses end up going bankrupt over it. No one wants to insure it. But people still keep moving in and trying.
From you there. It's good to try. I must be thinking of Dubuque. Have you heard, has Dubuque been having less trouble with it? Further up north?
I haven't heard any trouble out of Dubuque.
Okay. All right. What you're saying about the affordable housing stock there, and you know, this variability on the flood, right? The need to continue to look for flood issues. I do think it's worth taking a look at some of these communities in Iowa if you're looking for a tolerable climate outlook, lower cost housing. In Michigan too, a lot of parts of Michigan, you've got a lot of housing density, but like we heard, the infrastructure is not, there's more challenges. There seems to be less investment in the infrastructure. Tara, as someone who's looking to move, can you tell me with this chat, if you're able to chime in, is this giving you information that's useful, or what questions do you have?
No, this is very useful information. I mean, I'm looking at sustainability, cost of living. I have lived in the Midwest before, and to be honest, the snow thing kind of, I mean, I know it's needed. I know there's a reason for it and everything, but no, this is really good information, because I never even thought about the infrastructure, if there's going to be enough for, you know, people who are migrating, who are looking for another place to live. So, and I appreciate all of this.
Do you have anything that you've been wondering about that we're not hitting on so far before I talk more about infrastructure? Because I'm on like a weird kick about it right now.
Not really. Not at this point.
Okay, cool. I feel like it's really important to have you chiming in because there are a lot of people like you who should be thinking about it, you know? Like if you're in the Texas Gulf, if you're in these other highly vulnerable areas, you should think about getting out before you lose value in your home, right? But
Right,
on
right. And that's what that's kind of what we're looking at too, is that we want to be able to get out before we lose value in our home.
I think it's really important to try and get the word out there about the seriousness and the imminence of some of these changes because it's not like there's going to be a federal buyout where everyone can feel like they're going to be safe and they're going to be taken care of, especially as we think about the reality of infrastructure decay. So anyone here pay attention to Jackson, Mississippi, to the Jackson, Mississippi water situation? So, Sarah, you want to give a little summary about the collapse there, or do you not want to be put on the spot? It's okay.
Oh, geez. I mean, I don't remember the exact details, but I know it was in the semi-recent past and that they were on a boil water advisory because their water was not safe to drink. Like Flint, Michigan 2.0.
And, you know, totally based on a water system that had catastrophic failure at multiple points. You know, they had known that this infrastructure was moving towards collapse. I've been having my heart in my throat around New Orleans. You know, the Army Corps of Engineers has managed to stop that saltwater tongue, where we had thought that by the end of October, we'd have saltwater incursion into the New Orleans drinking water system, hitting all of the old lead pipes and creating just toxic, unrecoverable problems. Right? We've got to stay. The conditions have improved. There are parts of Louisiana, though, that are experiencing saltwater incursion into the drinking water system now. And we have to think about the fact that in these coastal areas where there are such intense pressures to move, what do you do if you're there when it has an infrastructure failure like this, right? You might not be experiencing direct threat from sea level rise, but if your area's water system gets corrupted with salt water, the people who would pay to fix it are probably going to be gone already, right? Gone or a foot out the door. I think that this question, this increasingly serious question of what's the points of infrastructure collapse in communities that aren't investing in infrastructure right now, are another push factor that if you're on the fence of getting out of an area, you should think, is there enough of a community here to keep the water system going when there are threats to the water system? Does anyone have any thoughts on that as we think about coastal movement? Can you think of any coastal areas that you consider to be particularly vulnerable or that you would predict would be resilient, where we would get enough people sticking around to keep the infrastructure together?
It just got me thinking a little bit. Can you hear me okay? We changed the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
About Texas. And I mean, everyone knows about the power grid collapse, and it's still got its own unique power grid. And it's a shame because Texas could be such a major producer of solar and wind power, but the way they do things and the way they keep themselves isolated, I mean, that was part of why we didn't want to stay. We felt that the leadership wasn't investing in infrastructure in a way to be sustainable facing the challenges that were coming for Texas.
When we talk about that transition to solar, a lot of people don't think about the transmission capacity challenges either. You know, there are multiple adjustments we need to make as we move towards sustainable energy. as we have a lot more solar generation in rural areas, building transmission capacity to get it to urban areas is a underexplored resilience challenge. Jay, I'm hoping to learn more about that at the conference. So just Jay and I are both going to Duluth this coming week for the Midwest Climate Resilience Conference, where there are a lot of people coming together to try and learn and talk about these challenges for specifically the Midwest destination area. I've gone to a lot of academic conferences in my career. I've never heard of one that sold out during early bird pre-sale. I know that there are more than 100 people on the waiting list for this conference before they stopped adding people to the waiting list for this conference. So any of us who feel like there's not enough interest in these resilience issues, I think this is very reassuring. These are professionals who are putting down money to get together to talk about this, and there isn't enough capacity. Jay, how many people do you know in Wisconsin who are going?
I'm the only one I know. And to be clear, I don't really work in this area. I'm a citizen member of the sustainability committee. So I don't live and work with it 40 hours a week. But yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was many weeks before the early bird deadline when they were sold out. So I think that's, as you said, that's a really positive thing.
It also made me think differently about the size of these housing issues in places that are like well publicized as climate destinations. Like many people think of Duluth as a popular climate destination because it is so cold there. I think when we actually look at the projections, the local wildfire risk is substantial. When we look at the rate of change in the forested areas around there, where in my take on the Minnesota outlook, I would say that central Minnesota has a stronger outlook than northern Minnesota for many resilience measures. But the housing in Duluth in late October, which is well outside of the tourist season, I was looking at trying to find an affordable place to stay. And the most affordable place was this hostel at $100 a night, where you weren't actually in a room. You were in a cubicle in a large arched room where everyone who wrote comments were like, I didn't get mugged here, and you can hear everyone. So, but that's and that was $100 a night, was to go sleep in a cubicle. And it sounds like the cubicle place has good vibes. I'm not trying to hate on it. I'm just saying that this is the housing availability, if you're trying to get there and get a job, if you're a working class person trying to live there, has to be just awful. I talked with someone who told me that her rent had gone up 150% since 2020, without, of course, any notable development to the building. It's like we just want to reclassify things as a luxury unit because they're painted beige, the color of luxury, and charge another $500, right? It's very strange.
My son lives there. He and his wife have renovated one of the older houses in the valley, the river valley. And the value of their house has gone up quite a lot. But it's kind of a rough neighborhood, really, and so uneven. Some of the houses really probably should be condemned. And the geography of the city is difficult with the very steep river valley, and then you get up on top of the areas that are easier to develop where the newer housing is, and then the climate completely changes. It's much more hot in the summer and cold in the winter. Just a few miles away because of the influence of the river. So yeah, they've talked about maybe wanting to move. They're planning to have children, but they can't really afford a place in the newer areas either.
It's really hard. There are just so many people who want to have kids. They want to have a family, and getting into a position where you feel economically secure enough, where you feel like you have housing you can trust for that. It's a big national challenge. Even if we try to look at it aside from the climate component, the housing costs are really changing the age and size of family in a measurable way. So this is an interesting conversation, getting some like on the ground perspective on infrastructure investment, on community attitudes, on housing prices. We were talking a little bit about localized food systems. And I wonder if, as we kind of close out the hour, we could talk a little bit about progress and concerns on those fronts in our area. I know that where I live, there's a lot of increasing frustration in the agricultural community that we grow so little food we can eat. And when I go to different agricultural communities in Iowa, the fact that people are unable to make a living doing anything other than corn and soy is frustrating to them. There's a desire to change practices, to grow more food that would allow for communities to be healthier. That doesn't mean we're there yet, but I think that a lot more people are thinking about these things in the agricultural community writ large. And we do have a number of local food movements and farms that are focused on serving local needs. We have healthy local farmers market culture. What's going on in Michigan with that?
Well, we also have a pretty healthy local farmers market culture. As far as the big agriculture, do you know?
So early when we moved here, someone asserted that Michigan is the second largest agricultural producer in the United States after California. And there, when you drive around rural Michigan, you do see an awful lot of diversity of crop.
A lot of corn, though.
Yeah, there is a lot of corn. But I feel, and this is, purely just subjective, but Michigan feels kind of food stable, right? It is not super hard to find stuff that is Michigan local grown. And there's a number of places that seem to kind of have a lot of this was grown in Michigan kind of pride. So agriculturally, I think Michigan's okay. How do you feel about like the grow it locally kind of community in Michigan, specifically the Kalamazoo area, like home gardening kind of stuff?
I feel like there's a lot of movement toward native plants and pollinators. In a small town near us, there's their downtown has a pollinator garden, and that's pretty great. There are a few organizations in the area in Kalamazoo, including one related to the college, the Gibbs House, that focus on permaculture and sustainable landscaping and sustainable agriculture farming, small scale, that are open to the public and have educational programs. So there's a movement in that direction. But like as far as the city we're in Portage, a suburb to Kalamazoo, they have I think they still need to get ahead where they allow more of that type of, like, it's still a lot of lawns. So, but I do see a shift in attitudes beginning, but it seems a little too early, too young. Like we should be further along in that.
I think something that skews my attitude on this is that Kalamazoo literally has a permanent location for a farmer's market there. And it's very nice. It's got, roofed pavilions and all that fun stuff. And the lake that we're like a 9-minute walk away from, there's a farm co-op like literally on that lake with cows, and they're growing crops and stuff like that. So again, I think because of my local exposure, my attitude may be skewed. All right, I'm done.
That's like really good local exposure to be able to have, though. I mean, I think everywhere we have local food movement, there's need for growth, but that's an inspiring and real strong point that you have there. Culture is different where you are in Iowa than where I am. And you've done so much related to local food. Can you speak to how or what is going on in your area?
Yeah, so I used to run my own urban farm for 4 odd years that I developed it. And yeah, I don't know. There's not much. All of the local farmers around me are old, really old. And the only downside of that is that they all have to get cashed out in order to relieve any of their acreage or any of their homes or any of their equipment. And so there's this real divide with younger people that want to get into gardening or farming, and yet there's a real lack of ability to have any access to land. Not saying that it's like impossible, but at least in my experience, right, once I started to become friendly and regularly interact, people would just throw me land. They'd be like, yeah, like it's mine, but you can come use it, because it's so much of it is underutilized. Yeah, the local food around here, yeah, it's primarily corn and soy everywhere. It's Iowa, but we have a really developed, like, my local farmers market's pretty small, but like Dubuque's is huge. I know quite a few people up in Dubuque. Cedar Rapids is huge, and there's a number of like sizable market gardens, essentially, all in that Iowa City, Cedar Rapids corridor, enough for all of that population and more. Davenport's pretty big. Like, there's a good amount of local food production around, especially here in the River Valley, I would say, along the Mississippi.
I think highlighting the Iowa City Cedar Rapids corridor as a developing area with a lot of infrastructure development and a lot of local food scene is good for people who are thinking about destinations. The Iowa City Cedar Rapids corridor has a lot of sweet spots related to it. And I like what you bring up, Kyle, about the fact that the farm population is aging. When I talk with older folks, a lot of my congregational talks, I'm talking with older folks. Many of them wish that they could find people who would work the land with more sustainable practices. And they say that it's very difficult to find a tenant farmer, to find someone who will work the land with any cover crop or use a no-till approach. It seems like there are so many younger people who want to engage in different farming practices. I hope we can find a way to connect people that makes sense. There's this real like crunch of resources, and I wonder how many people would have your experience that people want to help them get access to land.
Yeah, if you really go out there and ask for it and then just develop relationships with people, it was amazing to me how much land I could have had access to. People would just throw it to me. Just, it wasn't exactly it didn't make sense with the transportation and the logistics, but it's very available. And I know, at least here in Iowa, the Practical Farmers of Iowa have like, it's essentially like a dating profile that you can set up across the state of Iowa of landowners looking for tenant farmers. So they do have that. My profile somewhere on there, but there's just not enough, like, it's not as up to date, right? And I will just note one thing for Kalamazoo. At the time, when I was starting to shut down my farm and looking to move our family, Kalamazoo was right up there because it is a mecca for local food production and has an entire restaurant and local grocery store. They have all the infrastructure to make it easy that once you produce stuff, you can get it out to people. Unfortunately, here in Eastern Iowa, outside of Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, it's not as easy. You've got farmers markets and a couple restaurants here and there, but it's mainly direct to consumer, you know?
It's really cool insights. Jay, what's going on in your area?
Yeah, I think we've started that transition to a younger generation. There's some local organic farmers who are really quite visible in the community. There's a pretty good farmers market here. There's really no physical infrastructure, so most of the farmers market activities on Saturday morning, if you have a couple of cold, rainy Saturday mornings in a row, that can be pretty devastating to them. The CSA model is really strong. That's really the foundation of a lot of those markets. So they have a subscription. You know, people pick up a box of vegetables every week, and they'll tag on, you know, once a summer you can buy chickens and that kind of thing. One of the things that occurs to me, though, that I hear from the farmers and the kind of little bit of exposure I've had to them is that the farm bill really kind of defines the limits of what they can afford to do. And that's so heavily influenced by big ag that it makes it really, it slows down that transition. But I think it's just so important for, especially in the areas where food can grow, that people can grow food that they can eat, I could just foresee, farms maybe in Kansas, the aquifer dries up and so those farms are gone. And then that money comes up here and buys up the land that otherwise might be used for other things. And now we're growing corn and soybeans, in an area where we could otherwise, grow food. And so I hope that doesn't happen.
I'd like to mention the American Farmland Trust as a really important nonprofit that's doing work to prevent the conversion of this very valuable agricultural land, this high resilience agricultural land, to prevent its conversion to housing, to commercial, to mining, like you mentioned earlier, and other interests, because we do need to keep an eye on the land that can grow food. In a world of limited resources, agricultural land, a lot of it does need to be protected and valued as agricultural land. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about the local food scene over in your part of the Northeast?
Yeah, so where I am and much of Pennsylvania is very mountainous, so not really a hot spot for agriculture. However, we do have Lancaster, which is our, I guess, mecca of local food. And South Central, Southeast Pennsylvania in general has more of the agriculture. In Lancaster, they have a pretty robust CSA program, and a lot of people in Philly get their produce supplied through that program. A lot of the restaurants as well. Also, New Jersey actually has a surprising amount of farming and produce. There's a lot of like go pick your own fruit type of situations in New Jersey.
It's really cool to hear that is still contemporary. I know that New Jersey has like an old school reputation for table crop, but that's
why it's called the Garden State.
Yeah. That's cool to hear about. Yeah, everyone, thanks for joining together for this like wide-ranging conversation. Are there any other points that any of you wanted to talk about? Do you feel like we should try to get in here before we close for the day?
Something that's sticking with me, and you brought it up a little bit ago. We're talking about areas that have catastrophic failure of their water system. And what do you do when you're there? And I've been sitting and mulling it over ever since you mentioned it, right? What does a person do? What do you do when, your water table becomes corrupted by salt water, or, a mining operation, or, some large entity sticks a straw in your aquifer and all of a sudden your well stops working, right? Because my immediate reaction was, oh, well, you grab your go bag and pick up and go somewhere else, right? But a lot of people can't do that, right? And the farthest I've gotten so far is that I need to take a look at Flint, Michigan, and the people who've been living there and see, what they've been doing, right? I need to take a look at, there's an unincorporated town just outside of Houston that got hosed on water, and like they no longer have water services.
Between Dallas and Austin.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, sorry, Dallas. I said Houston. I meant Dallas. And so just you mentioning that, it's sticking with me and made me realize that that's a hard question. And I want there to be an answer for it. And I just need to do some more research into places that have already been living that for the last 5-10 years and see what's going on with them. That's all I wanted to say.
I'm grateful to you for lifting that up, because as you're naming the places to investigate, as we think about Jackson, as we think about these communities throughout the foot of Louisiana, it's really worth bringing home. There are a lot of people who are being impacted by this today, that it's not a future problem. It is very sobering. And I hope that if you're listening to this and you are a person who's in a vulnerable area, you hear that there are a lot of people who care about you. And if you have the capacity to make the move, you're not going to look like a crazy person for making the move. You should get out while the getting's good. I know that's a bright note to end things on, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. This was a cool conversation. It's nice to see some faces again. It's nice to see a new face. And Jay, I look forward to like actually seeing your face middle of next week.
Yep. See you Wednesday.
Take care. Folks, thanks for coming today. Thanks for listening in. As always, I want to thank all of our donors and volunteers. We'll be back next month with another community chat, but I don't know when yet. So stay posted. I'll get the details up. Take care, everyone.